Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. Though it's generally a given that law enforcement has to identify the perpetrator of a crime, in some cases they're also forced to identify the victim. This is most often seen in murder cases, where any number of factors can lead to a body being unrecognizable. Without knowing a victim's name, police are often left without a clear direction in their investigation, lacking vital clues about everything from suspects to potential witnesses. It's no wonder, therefore, that many of these cases drag on for years or even decades, requiring innovative techniques, extreme dedication, and usually at least a little bit of luck to finally solve. Today, we wanted to take a look at a few examples of these types of cases, focusing on murders featuring John and Jane Does who were later successfully identified. Though the perpetrators in all of today's cases have not necessarily been found, investigators have at least managed to discover the names of the victims, giving family and friends vital closure. Before we get to our list, don't forget to subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest videos. With that out of the way, here are 5 unknown murder victims who were later identified.
Though the case wasn't the result of a murder, the more than 20-year search for the identity of the man nicknamed the Grateful Doe is still one of the most interesting John Doe cases we have come across. We decided to include it on this week's list after it was recently requested by one of our viewers. On June 26, 1995, a tragic car accident resulted in the death of 2 men in Greenville County, Virginia. The men had been traveling along Route 58 in a Volkswagen Vanagon when the vehicle struck a pair of trees on the side of the highway. Neither man was wearing a seatbelt. Because there were no drugs or alcohol in either man's system, police believed that the driver may have lost control of the van after falling asleep at the wheel. While the driver's family was able to identify him as 21-year-old Michael Hager, they had no idea who he had been traveling with. The head wounds the mystery passenger had sustained during the crash added to the difficulty of identifying him. However, there were some useful clues found at the scene. In addition to 2 small amateur-looking tattoos, the man also had a pair of scalped Grateful Dead tickets from the previous 2 days and was wearing one of the band's t-shirts. The biggest clue of all was the note found with the body that read, "Jason, sorry we had to go, see you around, call me. Carolyn T. and Carolyn O. Bye." The note was also listed with a phone number with a 914 area code. Due to the evidence found at the scene, the unidentified man later became known as Jason Doe, or the Grateful Doe. Police estimated that the Grateful Doe was between 15 and 21 years old, and may have been picked up by Hager while hitchhiking. Hager was also a fan of the Grateful Dead, and could have picked up the unidentified man because of what he was wearing. Though the man's face was too damaged from the crash to release photos to the public, a facial reconstruction was later done and circulated. Over 200 missing people were ruled out in the search for the identity of the Grateful Doe. Despite an abundance of details, little more about the man's identity would be discovered over the following years. The number provided on the note found with the Grateful Doe returned no results, and the Carolines were never identified. Likewise, DNA, dental, and fingerprint records in law enforcement databases did not return a match to the Doe. In 2012, a much better facial reconstruction was created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children using the latest technology. This image began to circulate online amongst groups on Reddit, Facebook, and sites like WebSleuth until a user named Greymetal posted the image along with several other details from the case to the photo-sharing site Imgur in 2014. This led to the biggest break in the case yet, when in 2015 a person who claimed to be a former roommate of the unidentified man responded to the post. The roommate claimed that he and several others had lived with the man in late 1994 to early 1995 near the University of Illinois. Just like in the letter, the roommate had also known the man by the name Jason, and although he did not know his last name, he was able to provide photos and said that Jason had been a huge Grateful Dead fan. In 1995, Jason had left Illinois, and the roommate had not heard from him since. He believed that Jason was originally from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The photos the roommate provided bore a striking resemblance to the facial reconstruction image created in 2012. A short time later, news of the update in the Grateful Doe case finally made its way to a woman named Margaretta Evans. She turned out to be the unknown man's mother. Evans identified him as Jason Patrick Callahan, who was indeed originally from Myrtle Beach. She claimed that though she had never stopped looking for her son, she had never filled out a missing persons report because he was a frequent runaway and that she had not known where to report him missing. A DNA test confirmed the identification, and after more than 20 years, the mystery of the Grateful Doe was finally put to rest.
In the early hours of October 29, 2006, two men walking through the grounds of an oil lease property in Kilgore, Texas, came across something strange. There was a fire and some brush up ahead, and what looked like a burning mannequin. Given the time of year, the men initially thought that they might have stumbled upon an early Halloween prank, until a disturbing smell caught their attention. It turned out to be the charred body of a young woman. When investigators arrived on the scene, they discovered that they were already dealing with a tough situation. Though it was estimated that the woman's body had been doused in gasoline and set ablaze only a short time before the discovery, the fire had worked quickly and the woman was unrecognizable. However, there were some vital clues found at the scene. The victim had remarkably perfect teeth, including some baby teeth, an unusual thing for her age, which was estimated to be between 17 and 25. Semen was also discovered in the woman's body, indicating that she may have been sexually assaulted before her death. Though much of her clothing had been lost to the fire, a pale purple sweater was recovered. The garment would later give rise to her nickname, the Lavender Doe. Though there were hopes that someone would come forward looking for the young woman, police got no such luck. The best lead in the case they had was to a potential killer, a man named Joseph Wayne Burnett. Burnett was a convicted sex offender whose DNA had come back as a match to the semen found on the unidentified woman. However, he said that he had only picked up the woman for sex and claimed no further involvement. With nothing tying their suspect to the actual crime, police had hit a dead end, though Burnett remained a suspect. In the years that followed, few other promising leads emerged. Though investigators compared the Lavender Doe's DNA and distinctive dental records with numerous missing persons cases, they could find no matches. However, the investigation continued in full force online, where it had captured the attention of various amateur detectives and true crime addicts who became obsessed with identifying the Lavender Doe and solving her murder. One of these people eventually brought the case to the DNA Doe Project, a volunteer organization dedicated to identifying unknown deceased persons using forensic genealogy. The nonprofit agreed to assist on the Lavender Doe case in 2018. The same year that the Doe Project got involved, police also got their biggest break in the case yet. In July, a woman named Felicia Pearson turned up dead. She happened to be the girlfriend of Joseph Burnett. This time, police found Burnett much more eager to talk to them. He not only confessed to Pearson's murder, but also admitted that he had been behind the murder of the Lavender Doe. Unfortunately, Burnett had little in the way of useful information to offer investigators about the young woman's identity. He said that he had picked her up in the parking lot of a local Walmart after she had approached him to try and sell magazines. He claimed that they had agreed to have sex, but then at some point, she had stolen money from him, so he strangled her. Burnett said that the woman's name might have been Ashley. Without any leads on the Lavender Doe's identity from the killer, it would be up to the volunteers at the Doe Project to solve the mystery. Through their tireless efforts, they were successful in 2019, after building out an extensive family tree using familial matches found on the public genealogy website GED Match. The volunteers tracked down a first cousin once removed who lived just 30 miles away from where the Lavender Doe had been found. Using this information, they were eventually able to figure out the name of a woman who they believed was the Doe's mother, which led them to the Doe herself. Her name was Dana Lynn Dodd. She had been just 21 years old at the time of her murder. Through the process of discovering Dana's identity, volunteers inevitably unearthed the tragic story of her life. Her mother had struggled with addiction issues and had left shortly after Dana had been born. Her father had followed suit and was believed to be homeless. Dana had lived with a stepmother up until the age of 14, when she was sent to live with an older half-sister in Florida. During this time, she struggled with addiction issues of her own, dropping out of high school and moving from her sister's house to a half-brother's house, and eventually into a place with her best friend. She had left this last known residence after her friend had become pregnant and wanted to clean up her life and keep the child. Dana decided to leave town and join a traveling magazine sales crew. It was the last time her family ever heard from her. Joseph Wayne Burnett was indicted for the murder of Dana Lynn Dodd in 2018 and is currently awaiting trial.
On the morning of November 18, 1968, a Pennsylvania state trooper noticed something strange on the side of the highway in Chester County, about a mile east of the Downington interchange. When he went to investigate, he discovered the body of a young man, slumped in a seated position against a tree. His cause of death was a single stab wound to the chest, which had pierced his heart. His face was covered with a navy peacoat. Though the man carried no ID, he had a distinctive tattoo on his upper right arm. The tattoo featured a bulldog wearing a First World War helmet with the lettering of the United States Marine Corps under it. Though the marking was enough to identify him as a possible member of the military, it was not enough for authorities to find the man's name. He was eventually buried at the Longwood Cemetery in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. The unknown man would come to be known as the Bulldog John Doe, sparking a mystery that would last for more than 40 years. At the same time that this was happening, a family in Massachusetts was desperately in search for their son. 20-year-old Marine Corporal Robert Daniel Corriveau had disappeared from a naval hospital in Philadelphia and was thought to be a deserter. Corriveau had served 2 tours in Vietnam, earning 3 Purple Hearts and 2 Bronze Stars during his time there. However, after experiencing several injuries, he had been sent back to Boston on leave to recover. While there, he had begun to experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and at the urging of his parents, his commanding officer had agreed to send him to the specialized facility in Pennsylvania. The last time Corriveau's parents had spoken to him, he had been hoping to get out of the hospital in time for Thanksgiving. Despite the family's insistence that their son would not have run away, military officers assumed otherwise and officially classified him as AWOL and later a deserter. Unaware that their son's body had already been discovered just 38 miles away from where he disappeared, Corriveau's family was left to spend the next 4 decades fighting to clear his name from the disgraceful designation. The first major break in the case finally happened in 2009, when investigators from the State Missing Persons Unit and the Chester County DA's office decided to exhume the body of Bulldog John Doe from the Longwood Cemetery. A DNA profile was then obtained through bone samples and entered into the National Missing Persons database. Because it was assumed that the unidentified man was in the military, the Naval Criminal Investigation Service Cold Case Unit was also brought in to help with the case. The investigation eventually tracked down the sister of Robert Corriveau, a woman named Virginia Cleary. When they asked her about her brother's tattoo, she was sure that they had finally found him. A DNA sample provided by Cleary confirmed the match, and in 2012 it was officially announced that Robert Daniel Corriveau was the true identity of the Bulldog John Doe. Though the revelation was monumental given how much time had passed, the news was bittersweet for Corriveau's family. While the mystery of the man's whereabouts had finally been solved, there was little chance of receiving the same kind of closure about the unanswered questions surrounding his death. Among these questions is how Corriveau was able to escape from the locked hospital where he was being treated, or whether he indeed managed to escape at all, with some believing he may have been murdered by someone within the hospital. Sadly, a substantial amount of evidence in the case had been lost to time over the decades, and tracking down possible witnesses was further complicated by the fact that patients' records are sealed. This means that it's almost impossible to even establish who might have been in the hospital at the same time as Corriveau. Still, many have refused to give up on the case, believing that the murder of Robert Corriveau will eventually be solved.
On November 10, 1979, a farmer in Caledonia, New York, made a gruesome discovery in one of his cornfields. After noticing a piece of red clothing and suspecting that he had caught a trespassing hunter, he went to investigate, only to stumble across the body of a young woman. She had been shot twice, once in the head over her right eye and once in the back. When police arrived on the scene, they noticed that the pockets of her pants had been turned out, as well as those of the distinctive red nylon automotive windbreaker she was wearing that had been spotted by the farmer. Investigators suspected this had been done by the perpetrator while removing the woman's identification. They estimated that she was between 13 and 19 years of age. Because police could not identify her, they referred to the victim as the Caledonia Jane Doe. They had no idea that it would take more than 35 years to learn her real name. A major issue that police ran into during their investigation was the fact that it had rained heavily prior to the discovery of the young woman's body, meaning that vital physical evidence had been washed away. This made the chances of finding a potential perpetrator all the more difficult. An autopsy revealed that the gunshot to the head had likely caught the victim by surprise, as she had not flinched or turned around. Combined with blood evidence found near the road, investigators concluded that the unidentified woman had first been shot outside of the cornfield, then dragged in and shot in the back. Several pieces of evidence suggested that she was not from New York and may have been a hitchhiker. She had visible tan lines from a halter top or bathing suit that showed the woman had likely come from a warmer climate, and she had a homemade necklace that resembled Native American jewelry commonly found in the American Southwest. She also had a keychain with her that was known to be sold in vending machines along the New York Thruway, suggesting that she had been traveling. Further tests conducted on her teeth found a mineral content and composition consistent with the regional drinking water in the southern and southwestern United States, making it likely that the victim had at least spent her early years there. In addition to this evidence, the unidentified woman's stomach contents were analyzed, and it was thought that her last meal could have been at a nearby diner in the town of Lima. Witnesses later said they had seen a young woman there accompanied by an older man. Though police received plenty of tips, they ultimately found themselves no closer to identifying the Caledonia Jane Doe or her killer. Decades passed without any new updates. In 2006, new analysis was done on grains of tree pollen found on the doe's clothing. When results showed that some of these species were not native to New York, investigators were able to strengthen their case that the Caledonia Jane Doe was from out of state. More specifically, they were able to narrow down her likely place of origin to California, Arizona, or Florida, owing to pollen from an invasive Australian pine that is only found in specific areas of the country with warm climates. Ultimately, the big breaks in the case would come in 2014, when a coincidence pulled the pieces of the puzzle together. It started when a woman named Laura Noel reached out to another woman named Pamela Dyson on social media. Dyson was the half-sister of a high school friend that Noel had been hoping to reconnect with, a woman named Tammy Jo Alexander. Dyson informed Noel that unfortunately she had no idea where her half-sister was, and hadn't for several decades. Tammy had run away from her home in Brooksville, Florida, sometime between 1977 and 1979, while she was working as a waitress at a truck stop owned by her mother and stepfather. It was assumed that she had left to start a new life away from the turbulence of her mother's drug addiction and violent temper. However, when Dyson reached out to the rest of her family, she discovered that no one had heard from Tammy since she had left home. Concerned that something may have happened to her, she contacted the Hernando County Sheriff's Department, who informed her that no missing persons report existed for her sister, though they promptly filed one. As the report began to pop up in missing persons databases, it eventually caught the eye of a man named Carl Koppelman. Koppelman was an artist in California who was involved in the web sleuths community and who had sketched a portrait of the Caledonia Jane Doe in 2010. He noticed the striking resemblance between the sketch he'd done and the photo included in the report about Tammy Jo Alexander, concluding that they were likely the same person. Koppelman sent this information to police, who then arranged to take a DNA sample from Dyson to see if she was a familial match to the Caledonia Jane Doe. It turned out that Koppelman was right, and after more than 3 decades, the mystery was finally solved in January of 2015. Despite this major revelation, police have unfortunately come no closer to identifying Tammy Alexander's killer in the years since they learned her name. Though the infamous confession killer Henry Lee Lucas claimed to have murdered Tammy while she was still unidentified back in the 1980s, this confession was never deemed credible, and there was no evidence to support the claim. While many hold out hope that the case may one day officially be closed, the murder of Tammy Jo Alexander remains unsolved.
On August 14, 1977, the body of a young woman was found by some blackberry pickers off a quiet road in Everett, Washington. The woman had been brutally shot several times in the head, making her almost unrecognizable. Her body had been left to decompose in the summer heat, adding to law enforcement's struggle to identify her. Items found with the unknown woman also offered little insight. She had no purse or driver's license and carried with her just 17 cents, an empty plastic bag, and an open pack of cigarettes. However, in a couple of lucky breaks, investigators would eventually succeed in catching her killer. A man named David Roth had been arrested nearby just days before the discovery of the body, after acting erratically and waving a rifle around in the parking lot of a bar. Though he had been released from jail by the time investigators were informed about the woman's body, Roth later told a friend about a hitchhiker he had murdered in Everett. The friend called police, and a case was built against Roth. He was convicted of the unknown woman's murder in November of 1979. Despite solving the murder, investigators were no closer to establishing the identity of Roth's victim. When asked, he confirmed that she was a hitchhiker, but claimed that he had never bothered to get her name. He told police he believed the woman was in her 30s, owing to wrinkles around her eyes. Roth picked her up in Everett on August 9, 1977, and had propositioned her for sex. When she refused, he snapped and killed her. Though the unknown woman remained a nameless victim for decades, there were those that refused to let the case be forgotten. In 2008, a renewed effort to identify the woman began at the behest of the Doe Network, an international volunteer organization devoted to helping law enforcement solve missing and unidentified persons cases. The body of the unknown woman was exhumed and was examined by the state anthropologist with the King County Medical Examiner's Office. It was determined that the woman was between 16 and 19 years of age, far younger than previously thought. This attracted the attention of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who provided an updated composite sketch of the victim. At the same time, she was given the nickname Precious Jane Doe by a detective working on the case named Jim Scharf. He felt a personal connection to the case, giving her the nickname to remind the public that Precious Jane Doe likely had loved ones and family members who deserved answers. Even after interest in the case was reignited, though, big breaks wouldn't come for another few years. This finally happened thanks to the work of two key individuals, Dr. Barbara Ray Venter and Dr. Ed Green. First, Green was able to successfully develop a technique to extract a complete DNA profile from hair without root tissue attached. This was not only a major breakthrough in the Precious Jane Doe case, where investigators had long failed to obtain usable DNA samples, but also a major breakthrough in DNA technology more broadly. For a time, the technique was thought to be impossible. Next, Venter was able to use the obtained DNA profile to search public genealogy websites to begin to establish a family tree. She had previously used this technique while helping investigators catch the Golden State Killer. Venter was eventually able to track down several half-siblings of the Precious Jane Doe and discovered her birth name, Elizabeth Ann Elder. However, this was not the end of the road for the team of investigators. They had long believed that their Jane Doe had been adopted and would have been known by a different legal surname. This was confirmed by interviews with some of the half-siblings who had also been adopted. Finally, in June of 2020, the mystery was solved when the team of genealogists was able to discover the identity of the woman's adoptive parents. Their Jane Doe's name was Elizabeth Ann Roberts. After the identification, more details flooded in. Elizabeth had gone by the name Lisa and had run away from her home in Roseburg, Oregon in the summer of 1977. When Lisa's parents last spoke to her, they begged her to come home. She said that she would think about it. Her parents sent her a check to a branch of the Seahurst First Bank in Washington, but she never picked it up. She was just 17 years old at the time of her murder. Though Lisa's story ultimately had a tragic ending, investigators were able to provide her family with some amount of closure, ensuring that she got her name back after almost 43 years.
On November 10, 1985, a hunter found a 55-gallon metal barrel near a burnt-out and abandoned general store in Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Inside were the dismembered and skeletonized remains of an adult woman and a young girl, wrapped in plastic. The haunting discovery prompted an investigation that would ultimately span several decades and would never fully be solved. Autopsies conducted on the woman and young girl revealed that both had died of blunt force trauma to the head. It was believed that they had been killed several years earlier. Despite massive publicity in the US and Canada, generating hundreds of leads, neither victim could be identified. They were buried in the Allenstown Cemetery with a tombstone that read, "Here lies the mortal remains, known only to God, of a woman aged 23 to 33 and a girl child aged 8 to 10. Their slain bodies were found on November 10, 1985, in Bear Brook State Park. May their souls find peace in God's loving care." The case only grew more horrifying when in the year 2000, a second metal barrel was found near the same site, containing the remains of two more young girls. The first was between 2 and 4 years old, and the second between 1 and 3. It was believed that these victims had been killed at the same time as the other two females, and in the exact same way, but that the second drum had somehow been missed. Like with the previous discovery, police were at a loss to identify the victims or present a possible killer. As the years went by, multiple techniques were employed to aid in the identification of the victims, who by this time were being referred to as the Allenstown Four. Multiple facial reconstructions were done by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, being constantly refined as new information became available. In 2014, investigators announced their biggest break in the case yet, when DNA profiling revealed that the woman and the oldest and youngest girls were maternally related, meaning that the oldest victim could be the girl's mother, aunt, or sister. A year later, the link was definitively settled, and it was declared that the two girls were the daughters of the oldest victim. The girl who was between 2 and 4 years old, who came to be referred to as the middle child, was not related to the other victims. It would take several more years of work and a little luck to put the rest of the pieces of the puzzle together in the case, exposing a dark and tangled web of depravity in the process. When authorities finally got a clear picture of what was going on, it all pointed to one man, Terry Peter Rasmussen. Rasmussen earned himself the nickname the Chameleon Killer for good reason. His use of countless aliases meant that his crimes were extremely difficult to track and link together, even as he served jail time for serious offenses. Under the alias Bob Evans, he had dated a woman named Denise Bowden, who disappeared along with her daughter Dawn in 1981. Though Denise was never seen again, her daughter reemerged several years later, first when Rasmussen was arrested for a drunk driving offense under the name Curtis Kimball, and later when he was living in a trailer park in California under the name Gordon Jensen. Both times, Rasmussen claimed that Dawn Bowden was his daughter, calling her Lisa. When he abandoned the young girl in 1985, he was brought up on charges and eventually served time in prison. However, authorities would not learn of Lisa's true identity until much later. After his release, Rasmussen went by the name Larry Vanner, marrying a young chemist named Unsolved June sometime in 2001. When Unson's family and friends stopped hearing from her after the marriage, they started to get worried and called the police. Sadly, the young woman's body was found in the crawl space of Rasmussen's home, dismembered and mummified under several pounds of cat litter. She had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Rasmussen was arrested in 2003 and ultimately convicted of Unson's murder. The police were able to match the Larry Vanner name to the Curtis Kimball, Gordon Jensen, and Bob Evans aliases Rasmussen had previously used. They still had no idea what the real name of their perpetrator was. He was tried and sentenced under the name Bob Evans for the murder of Unsolved June, dying in prison in 2010. Then, beginning in 2016, a flurry of new information started to come out. After the reemergence of Lisa, who by now knew her real name was Dawn Bowden, police were able to connect the man known as Bob Evans to the Allenstown barrel case. Furthermore, Evans was found to be the biological father of the middle child found in the barrel. After some more DNA searches, investigators were able to track down 4 other biological children linked to the man who were still alive. They were finally able to give police the real name of their culprit, Terry Peter Rasmussen. Though police now had a suspect in the case, there was still the matter of actually identifying the victims in the Allenstown barrel case. In 2018, a research librarian named Rebecca Heath gave investigators a tip that blew the case wide open. After becoming obsessed with the Allenstown murders, Heath had meticulously tracked down leads until she came across the disappearance of a mother and her 2 daughters, dating back to 1978. The woman's name was Marlise Ellen Honeychurch, and her 2 daughters were named Marie Elizabeth Vaughn and Sarah Lynn McWaters. The 3 had last been seen at a Thanksgiving dinner with Honeychurch's mother, where she had introduced her family to her new boyfriend, Terry Rasmussen. In 2019, DNA testing confirmed that Marlise, Marie, and Sarah were 3 of the identified victims in the Allenstown case. Though much of the investigation has been wrapped up since the identification of Rasmussen and 3 of the 4 barrel victims, there are still many aspects of the case that lack satisfying conclusions. For one, though Rasmussen is considered the most likely culprit, he is only officially a suspect, and due to his death, he can never be appropriately punished for his crimes. The disappearance of Denise Bowden has likewise never officially been solved, and her body has never been found. Finally, there's the matter of the 4th barrel victim, the girl who was determined to be Rasmussen's daughter. Despite being the first victim to be concretely linked to the killer, police are no closer to discovering her identity. Unfortunately, it looks as though for now, the haunting remnants of the case will continue to linger on. That brings us to the end of our list. Are there any other John and Jane Doe cases like this that you'd like us to cover in a future video? Let us know about them in the comment section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest videos. Thank you for watching.